Lesson 38 useEffect. 1. Introduction. Good day everyone. Today we are going to explore a fundamental concept in React, the mechanism that allows your component logic to synchronize with external systems or side effects. In React, this mechanism is exposed via a hook called useEffect. Its role is to help your components stay in sync with things that lie outside of React's pure rendering flow, for example timers, subscriptions, external APIs, or third-party widgets. The goal of this session is to understand what useEffect is, how and why to use it, how to manage its dependencies, and the common pitfalls you'll want to avoid. 2. What useEffect does. At its core, useEffect lets you declare a piece of logic that runs after your component has rendered and whenever certain values change. It has two major parts: the setup logic, which runs when necessary, and optionally a cleanup logic, which undoes or stops whatever you started in the setup. When your component is added to the screen, when some of its controlling values change, or when it is removed, these lifecycle moments are where your effect logic is executed. useEffect is therefore React's way of saying, after you render and synchronize with React's world, this is how you synchronize with the outside world, and optionally, when you go away or change, undo or clean up. 3. When to use it, and when you likely don't need it. You should use useEffect when you need to connect your component with something external or imperative, such as a network connection, a subscription to an event, a timer, or a DOM integration outside of React's declarative model. If your logic is purely about rendering based on state and props, you likely do not need an effect. Overusing effects can complicate your code and lead to subtle bugs. So the guiding question: are you synchronizing with something that React itself does not control? If yes, an effect might be appropriate. If not, prefer simpler patterns. 4. Dependencies and execution timing. A key dimension of useEffect is the dependency list. This list tells React, keep an eye on these values. If any change, rerun the effect. If you omit the list altogether, React will treat it as run after every render. If you supply an empty list, it means run once after mount. If you supply a list of specific values, it means run after mount and whenever any of these values change. Understanding this is vital to getting correct behavior and avoiding unnecessary or repeat executions. Essentially, each value that your effect references, and that can change over time, should appear in that list. When React detects that a listed value changed, using an object-level comparison strategy, it will run the cleanup, if any, and then the new setup logic. 5. Common usage patterns. Here are a few typical use cases. Connecting to an external system. When the component appears, you open a socket or a data connection. When it disappears, you close it. Controlling a non-React widget. When your component's props change, you inform the widget. When the component unmounts, you clean up the widget. Fetching data from a remote source. On mount or when some parameter changes, you trigger a request. You also handle the possibility of outdated responses and cancel them in cleanup. These patterns show how useEffect bridges the React lifecycle with external side effects or imperative code. 6. Advanced considerations and pitfalls. There are several subtleties you must be aware of. If your dependencies include objects or functions that change identity on each render, your effect may run far more often than you intended. In those cases, you'll want to refactor so the object is stable or the function is defined inside the effect itself. If your effect updates state and that state is part of the dependencies, you may create a loop. Effect runs, update state, re-render, dependency changed, effect runs again, etc. This often signals a design issue. In development mode, especially when strict mode is enabled, React might intentionally invoke setup and cleanup extra times to catch bugs. You must write your cleanup logic such that it fully reverses what your setup logic did. The user should not be able to notice the difference between one setup and a setup cleanup setup sequence. Effects do not run during server rendering, they run only on the client. This has consequences when you're using frameworks that rely on server rendering, especially if your effect impacts what the user initially sees. 7. Summary and best practice advice. To wrap up, useEffect is an extremely useful tool when you need to interface with the world beyond React's rendering model. But with great power comes responsibility. You must declare your dependencies correctly, perform cleanup diligently, avoid creating unintended loops, and minimize the use of effects when simpler patterns suffice. Good habits include keeping the effect focused on one responsibility, extracting complex logic into custom hooks when it's reused, and always thinking, why is this effect needed? What external system am I synchronizing with? If you ask those questions and design accordingly, your components will remain predictable, performant and maintainable. 7. Summary and best practice advice. To wrap up, useEffect is an extremely useful tool when you need to interface with the world beyond React's rendering model. But with great power comes responsibility. You must declare your dependencies correctly, perform cleanup diligently, avoid creating unintended loops, and minimize the use of effects when simpler patterns suffice. Good habits include keeping the effect focused on one responsibility, extracting complex logic into custom hooks when it's reused, and always thinking, why is this effect needed? What external system am I synchronizing with? If you ask those questions and design accordingly, your components will remain predictable, performant and maintainable.